Due to the coverage emanating from America involving violent video games recently, I have felt the need to put my opinion out there into the vast void of cyberspace and see what comes back. I was thinking about adding this as episode 2 of my How About a Cup of Rage series, but thought it could be taken in bad taste and have decided to release it as a standalone blog and not part of another series. Some may be asking, why am I writing this and why would I be angry about it? Well folks, it's not really anger I feel towards the coverage video games and violent video games in particular has been receiving. Initially I was pretty annoyed with the flippant remarks that were being thrown around online after the Parkland, Florida incident in the USA. These type of remarks have been kicking around for as long as I can remember, and frankly I am tired of them. I am referring to a number of posts I saw from people instantly jumping on the bandwagon that violent video games inherently cause violence. I was annoyed on 2 levels. 1. I see myself as a fairly well-rounded person who likes to use reason and common sense to make arguments. I can't see for a second how a violent video game could make someone kill another human being. And 2. The fact that some people think that violent video games in fact make you do this only makes me feel anger towards them for not thinking long and hard about it and even carrying out some research before shooting their mouth off. I would say if someone commits an atrocity such as a mass shooting, they clearly have way more serious problems than a desensitization to violence coming from video games, movies, television, and sports. There are mentally ill people in the world and they need help and protection from even themselves at times. Violent video games are not at fault, much like a gun is not at fault for killing someone. Anyone who says they are is essentially an idiot who can't think and reason for themselves. In my opinion, the reason for many of the tweets coming out in favor of the theory that violent video games causes violent behavior is the quote from President Trump saying that he is hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts. That one comment has spawned a huge debate, and it's from that point I would like to lay out my thoughts. I am going to throw out a statement that, in my view, shouldn't really shock anyone who participates in the world in general. People enjoy violence. You can cry fake news and wrap things up in nice packages and say that's not true, but let's face it, a lot of people do enjoy a certain level of violence. All of this is backed up by the many millions of people who pay for pay-per-view boxing, wrestling, or MMA. The biggest growth in the sporting industry at the moment is MMA, one of the most violent forms of sporting endeavor. Does watching MMA, boxing, or martial arts tournaments inherently make people more violent? It can be gratuitous and does lend itself to a certain level of glorification, but does it make people inherently violent from watching it? My next question lies upon the issue of desensitization. Are people desensitized to violence if they play violent video games regularly? I would say on a common sense level, and this is backed up by evidence from the Dana Foundation and also the Center for Educational Neuroscience, that yes, it most certainly does desensitize people and especially young people to violence. My next question is, if in fact it does desensitize people to violence, then by how much does it desensitize people? What are the levels? Does it do it enough that people start being more violent and carry out violent acts? My research on this has shown there is no evidence to suggest that violent video games makes people violent. It may, and only in some cases, desensitize some to certain aspects of violence. Being desensitized to violence and purposefully carrying out violent acts because of playing video games are not the same thing. I would say we have to look at extreme cases here. The vast majority of the population who play violent video games, watch violent movies and watch violent sporting endeavors never commit and will never commit, e.g. a mass shooting. There will, like most cases in human history, be an extreme element who are somewhat of a different breed when it comes to violent tendencies. Is this genetic, or are they fashioned by their experience in the world they are brought into? I would like preface this next statement by saying I am in no way excusing the people who carry out mass shootings or other such atrocities, but what are the causes for it? There must be a reason, or for us all to feel a little better I would hope that there is one, as the thought that some people have a streak of evil running through them even if they have been raised well and told the rules of society makes my blood run cold. The questions I would ask before throwing out blame towards other areas of society, i.e. video games or movies etc., are: has abuse been involved? Have they been given the tools by their guardians where they are taught to know the difference between right and wrong? Has substance abuse or alcohol been a problem? Do they have a low IQ and are they easily led by others? All of these types of problem in my mind contribute towards someone becoming violent, a huge amount more so than perhaps playing violent video games or watching violent movies, and there is more evidence online from studies of those issues being the main contributing factor more so than video games. Those are much harder problems to solve when comparing to playing violent video games. America is the country I will focus on for my next section, as they seem to have a huge gun violence problem in comparison to all other European counterparts. It is important to make some comparison in terms of statistics in this case and then look at some of the reasons behind America's high numbers in comparison to others. First off, according to a quick Wikipedia search, America, for every 100 citizens 101.5 guns are owned. If you look at the BBC News and CNN information, they say it is slightly less than 90 per 100 citizens. If you have a search around online from a few other sources, it becomes clear that a large number of citizens in America own a gun, or at the very least have access to one in their household. According to a survey taken by the Pew Research Center in 2017, it found that over a third, 37%, of all citizens had access to a firearm within their household. Like most surveys, they rely on people telling the truth and in fact being willing to share their own private and personal information, so this number could, in fact, be a lot higher. I would speculate that it wouldn't be less, as the 37% have admitted to having access to a firearm and have no real reason to be dishonest about this on a survey, as it doesn't benefit them in any way. Some other people may not want anyone to know they have access to a deadly weapon and would therefore, possibly, want to keep it to themselves. In terms of gun deaths, America has approximately between 3 to 3.5 deaths per 100,000 of the population, and this is confirmed through a quick search of Wikipedia, Vox, CBS News, and various other media outlets. Moving on from gun ownership, as owning a gun does not necessarily mean you're going to use it, I will now look at a much more horrifying topic. America has approximately 10.5 deaths per 100,000 of the population. When you compare this to Switzerland, who have a large number of gun owners as a country, 24 out of every 100 citizens, they have a rate of deaths by firearms of approximately 3.01 per 100,000 of the population. By no means a small number, but a huge drop compared to America. If you look at my country, Scotland/Great Britain, we have a gun death rate of 0.2 per 100,000 of the population, and gun ownership in the UK stands at 6.2 per 100 people. To me, these figures spell out a reason, not a full collective reason for gun violence, but a very compelling reason nonetheless. More guns available seems to translate to more gun deaths in America. In addition to the facts I have given, America also has the highest number of mass shootings compared to a large number of countries. Between 1996, 2012 there have been 90 mass shootings in America compared to 18 in the Philippines, 15 in Russia, 11 in Yemen, and finally 10 in France. It is hopefully apparent to all that picking America as my focus here is mainly due to the fact that a huge part of the video games industry resides within its borders. Yes, of course there is gun violence in other countries who also have access to the same violent games, but they have a massively reduced number of deaths when comparing to America. So another question I would ask is, if violent video games make people commit horrible crimes like mass shootings in America, then why is it not happening to a similar degree in other countries? Is there a connection being violent crime and violent video games? If there is a compelling data set, then I have still to see it. With all of the media coverage currently coming out about this topic, you would think I would have found it whilst researching this blog. This is where the main problem lies, the problem that many politicians have suggested in the past when trying to connect violence with video games or even movies. The problem is that there isn't a link, or at least a link that is sizable enough for people to stand up and take notice. The video games industry has had the violent games are corrupting our youth sentiment from politicians, mainly, for as long as I can remember. From President Trump's recent statement I mentioned earlier to the horrible Columbine High School mass shooting, where some people attributed blame to Marilyn Manson, suggesting his music was one of the reasons for it happening. I just can't seem to get my head around why this issue with video games, movies, and music keeps rearing its head. The cynical part of me, and perhaps the more realistic part, would suggest that America needs to throw blame upon these industries for these appalling tragedies, as the NRA and gun lobby in America has such a huge grip and say on how things go in America that there will never be any real meaningful gun reforms. Another part of my frustration with the media at large is that hardly anyone mentions the policies or safeguards the video games industry has put in place to try and avoid younger children getting their hands on more adult-level games. Looking at an article from The Guardian, it was 2012, 6 years ago, that Pan-European Game Information Rating System, PEGI, became legally enforceable in the UK. This rating system was put in place to give parents of young children and young adults more information about what type of games their children were playing. Ultimately, an 18 certificate game contains a level of violence, sex, drugs, etc. that is unsuitable for anyone under that age, much like the movie industry and the music industry with the parental advisory logo. At the end of the day, the research is there for all to see. Violent video games do desensitize children in particular to violence, but doesn't cause them to inherently become violent people. By and large, it is down to the parents of children to be responsible for the type of media they consume. My argument is coming to a close, and I would like to put across a few final points. 1. The argument about violence in video games and its effect on the youth of today will continue, regardless of how many studies to the contrary are thrown in politicians' faces. 2. Sensible gun control laws are in place in many countries, and they don't have anywhere near the level of catastrophic homicide/murder that takes place in America, and blaming, or attempting to suggest blame at the video games/music/movie industry only really points towards a larger problem, which is gun control law. 3. Mental health should be put front and center when trying to decode and unravel why someone would commit a violent act. Other outside factors like violent video games and other such media, yes, won't help someone who is already on dark path, but it is most certainly not the root cause. Finally, the video games industry can do more to try and avoid whenever possible the glorification of death within their video games. Some violent video games that I have played in the past have indeed shocked me, but it in no way made me think, oh yeah, I should go out and massacre a whole bunch of people. From my own vast experience of playing video games, 30 years, I have realized that they can take you somewhere far away, somewhere you could never imagine. They provide a level of escape from everyday life. In many respects, you could even argue that they provide an outlet to vent the frustrations of everyday life, an escape if you will. Some games provide an immensely emotional and worthwhile experience, teaching us that life is precious and should be valued at all costs. Would those video games still be here if all violent video games were banned? If you stamp out violent video games or even movies or music, you deprive what us as human beings fundamentally crave: choice. We want to choose the media we consume. Sometimes it will be violent, and other times beautiful. Not many mention that from something violent or terrible, something beautiful and worthwhile can rise. The Last of Us, which is my favorite video game, has hugely violent and disturbing parts to it, but also beautiful and meaningful messages about family, trust, and love. This whole debate about the video games industry and the violent games it creates may even end up producing some changes to the release of certain violent games. This would spell a natural progression and is something I would be behind if it can be backed up with scientific research and evidence. I hope it has been an interesting read for you all. I have certainly enjoyed researching and writing it. I have definitely started to reevaluate my feelings on the subject, and at times have really questioned the need for gratuitous violence that glorifies death within video game, and I have come to one final conclusion. If you stop people making games of a violent nature, what else are you going to stop them from doing? Going to the movies to see a violent movie? Banning music that is considered suggestive and violent in nature? Banning alcohol? Banning cigarettes? Banning fast food? Banning sugar? Where would it stop? Fundamentally, I see human beings as a race pushing back on all of my above examples, possibly violently. Ultimately, you will all make your own mind up. I can only hope I have stimulated some thought processes that have perhaps made you think a bit more about the world we live in and the games we all play, and even the games we want to play. Or I could have simply rambled on incoherently. We shall see. Time will indeed tell. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Peace out. Phantom Lord.